welcome everybody to the Humpty Project's first interview episode. I'm really excited about this one. I have the pleasure of introducing all of you to Kyle Cronk. Kyle's president and CEO of South Sound YMCA in Olympia, Washington. If you're a leader looking to encourage, motivate, inspire, engage, restore, or even heal, you're going to find Kyle's unique way of developing radical effing leaders inspiring. Kyle works to help leaders raise the bar by creating company cultures that value belonging, achievement, and relationship. So, Kyle, if you don't mind, take a moment to introduce yourself to my network.
Yeah, well, Robert, I'm really excited about being here. Thanks for having me on your show. Totally honored and humbled to be here. And you said it right. I am the president of the South Sound YMCA, and Radical Effing Leaders is definitely my call sign on and kind of my tagline on LinkedIn. And what I do in the world, I'm a dad, probably first and foremost. I have 3 high school boys. You can see I have a beard, and I brew beer and I ride mountain bikes pretty much incessantly when I'm not developing leaders and running the South Sound YMCA and doing national YMCA leadership projects. Doing a lot of stuff actually across the country. So very busy, but love. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I've lived in Australia. I lived in the Midwest for a little bit of time. Moved back to Seattle in 1996, and I've been here in the Pacific Northwest ever since. Started working for the Y when I was a young, thought I wanted to be a teacher, and somebody said you should figure out if you like kids first. I thought that was fantastic advice. So he got me to volunteer at a YMCA summer camp called Camp Orkyla, and that's kind of where I got my leadership start at a very young age, and progressively just continued to develop within the YMCA. I never left.
I think it's been somewhere around 20 years you've been CEO level, but you've been with the YMCA organization for much longer than that, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm keen to tell people what the Radical Effing Leaders program and the Raising the Bar concept means. And I'm particularly keen to gain your insight as to how that can relate to traditional businesses like I'm in, which is electronics components and industrial control components,
absolutely.
manufacturing and distribution.
Yeah. Well, I'll start back with RFL or Radical Effing Leadership. That really came about. I had been sort of looking. Everybody's on a leadership journey, in my opinion.
Agreed.
So it doesn't matter whether you have the formal title or not. Everyone's a leader. You're a leader of yourself. You're a leader of your church. You're a leader of your, community group. You're a leader of your department. And really, Radical Effing Leadership came about, probably evolved from 2018 to 2023, and all the stuff that we experienced as a global community within all of those years. I mean, there was a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And generally people are leaders within companies in particular, and nonprofits is no different. That leaders are generally white, leaders are generally male. And I wasn't seeing those male leaders standing up for clear matters of right and wrong, whether that's voting rights, whether that's LGBTQ IA plus rights, whether that's anti-racism or standing up to the anti-Black violence. I mean, no one is really standing up in a way that shows how companies need to change their styles and create cultures that are welcoming to everybody. And that just isn't happening. We're talking about leadership, we're talking about competencies that people are getting confused with management competencies, which is there to maintain the status quo, rather than leadership competencies that are looking to co-create what that new system is that really values everyone. And then that goes into raising of the bar, and the bar, that's an acronym for belonging, achievement, and relationships. And really, that's the foundation of a culture, in a healthy culture in any organization. whether you're nonprofit, for profit, whether you're a faith-based organization or anything else. And really, when you get down to it, the type of culture that you create, or whether you intentionally do it or unintentionally do it, culture is actually how your strategy gets actualized and produces in the world, or you execute your strategy through your culture. You can't have one without the other. And it's a both and concept. You definitely need strategy, you definitely need culture, and you're creating culture whether you know it or not. So you might as well be intentional about it, and you might as well start valuing people within that process.
So a lot of meat on the bone, so to speak, there. One of the things that jumped out at me is that there's a lot of this discussion in the industry I'm in. So I've been in the electronics components distribution industry for 35 years. Uh, and it's pretty similar to what you described. It's generally white, it's generally male, and it's generally older.
Yep.
And we'll go to conferences and listen to people speak, and we all understand that we need to adapt to thrive. Um, but I wonder, this is something I wonder, and I haven't really posed this to many in my industry, but I wonder how we, or anybody outside of our industry as well, as humans, how can we really embrace uh, different people, different ways of viewing things, uh, if our actions are hurtful to the people in the communities. And when I say our actions, I talk about our voting actions or the actions that we support in our communities. If those actions are really actually hurtful to the people that we say that we're working to broaden out and reach.
I mean, the incongruency of what you just said is there's so many different interesting stats. So if you go back prior to George Floyd's murder, um, there were definitely the whatever acronym you want to use, whether it's DEI, JEDI, DEIB, anti-racism. There weren't a lot of those jobs either in the nonprofit industry or in the corporate sector. But then George Floyd's murder, and then corporations and entities start hiring a lot of DEI professionals, just for lack of a short term there. And the stats that I'm seeing now are from 2020 to 2023, is you had an uptick in the amount of positions that companies were hiring, saying that they really were stepping forward and they really wanted to make change. And now you see all the layoffs that have happened from 2020 to 2023, and you look at who's being laid off, it's the people of color in those positions, while the white people in those positions that were hired are now, they make up like 76 to 78% of the DEI professionals in that industry. And
I haven't seen the stat, but that's
yeah,
a bit
it's
disturbing.
right, it's very disturbing. And so calling people in, I've had this not raging, but definitely a debate over the last 4 or 5 days about calling people in, calling people out, and anti-racism work in leadership. So I want to be clear that I am not an expert in anti-racism. I am not an expert
Certainly, I'm not.
in DEI stuff.
Right.
What I am is a leader, and I am on my, not only am I on my leadership journey, I am on my anti-racism journey. And as such, I am incorporating things as I unlearn things and learn things into my leadership style. Now, the benefit that what has helped me along this journey is centering people. So if I center people, specifically marginalized or typically oppressed people, and those people are part of the co-creation process of co-creating the culture, co-creating the goals, co-creating the environment that we're in, and that those and we're making decisions collaboratively, that does a tremendous amount of stuff, not only for the company culture, but it really centers the humanity that we're talking about. And you even led into this when you talked about healing. I mean, that's how we heal. We heal together. We don't heal siloed. I mean, this is the other thing that I've learned, at least my experience in my anti-racism journey and my leadership journey, is that, and you asked one of the questions is what was my greatest bias that I had to overcome?
Right.
And I think early on it was not understanding that everybody in it to get justice and to center people, it's an all play. Everybody has a role to play. I have a role to play in that whole process. So you're absolutely right. You mean when you think of companies that have made big promises and then they're not living up to those promises, what I mean, what does that say to the people that make up those companies? And we're getting more and more diverse, every day.
Yeah, I really appreciate that insight, and you clearly have been like me on a journey. I think you're further along in the journey, and some of the terms I'm hearing, I couldn't have even I can't even recall when I first heard the term intersectionality. At first, I'd say I don't even know what that is. I'm starting to learn these things.
Sure.
Um, but I became comfortable using my voice only recently. I suppose it goes back to the one stat, and I want to then have you expound on this. The one stat you said that 70-some% of the people that have been retained in DEI positions now tend to be white. And that makes me feel like here I am, a white guy. Here I am stealing a bit of thunder from people. But I started to feel like I had a voice because I can use my voice from a different perspective than others and be an ally and even a sponsor of people. So when did you become comfortable proactively using your voice? Um, and what advice can you offer others that are looking to be more proactive? What challenges will they face?
Yeah, well, a lot.
Yeah,
They will face a lot
no
of
doubt.
challenges. Um, the when did I feel comfortable? Um, I don't know that I am comfortable.
Ah,
I think that I'm very uncomfortable. Like I said,
that's
I'm not an expert, but I have a duty and a responsibility, as the shirt says here.
yes. I always love
Um,
your shirts.
my silent as a white cisgendered male, I have all every ounce of privilege that's unearned that's been granted to me, and I have not always been leading in the way that I could. Now I would say that
Sure.
I have leaned into this work uh, for a long time. I wouldn't say I was very good at it this whole time, and I'm getting
Right.
better at it, I think. um, but like I also said, leadership is a journey and it's non-linear, and anything with racism I've learned is absolutely non-linear. The whole idea that you're going to do A, then B, then C, then D, and then racism is done is a white supremacy cultural kind of phenomenon that there's a step-by-step process and we're just going to get rid of it. That's not how it works, because the system is trying to maintain itself and fights against any sort of change, just like any change initiative, anything that's going to change. And here we're talking about big systems. This is not, I don't even know what the analogy would be, but we're talking about massive systems. We're talking about the system of finance in the United States. We're talking about capitalism. We're talking about the educational system. We're talking about systems of government. I mean, those are the things that need to change. So when we're talking about who is being centered in those decisions when we design systems that impact people, those are the things that need to change. And with any change initiative, something that big, that requires a lot of us. So one is when I got comfortable, I'm not comfortable because I don't believe I'm an expert. I do believe I have a responsibility to use my unearned privilege to do the things that I'm doing. And also the difference for me is there, I've been reminded of this a lot, that, as a white man, I can choose not to deal with racism anytime that I want. And in fact, if you were to go back to when I started doing this within the Y, and I would take this all the way back to 2009 when I started and not in the Y that I'm at, but when did I start doing some of the things that I'm doing today? Or, from, say I started my journey in 2009 and I'm on that journey till today, what I have to lose and no one is telling me, hey, Kyle, you need to lead with an anti-racism lens. No one is telling me to do that. And I am helping people, I am determining, like, we need to come together. At least as it relates to the responsibilities in the jobs that I've had. So I think that's an interesting point. And then the other point that I wanted to make about this whole topic is that again, what's at risk for me? When I wear this shirt into my local grocery store on a day-to-day basis, or I go to a Rotary meeting in my town, or I go and I talk in front of 300 people to talk about equitable board governance, what do I have to lose? Maybe I'll lose my job.
Right.
A Black person doing the same thing, they can lose their life. So that, for me,
fortunately, fair enough.
Yeah, that to me is what keeps me on and leaning in. And I'm not always going to do it right. I make mistakes. I've caused a tremendous amount of harm to Black and brown people, or definitely over the course of my career. But even as I've led with this, this raising the bar philosophy of belonging, achievement, relationships, and the reason that I called it radical effing leadership is because we needed to wake people up. And I, whether I stay, I love the why. I really do. I've been with it, like you said, a very long time. And I want our organization to progress and move forward. And they're a staunch, they're a 187-year-old entity. And it's hard to create change. But with that, if I wanted to go out and coach leaders, like, I think that's an amazing thing. I would love to coach other leaders that are on this journey as well. And, can a company hire somebody with the title of radical F in leadership? I don't know. We'll see. But that's what I would have to say. And the follow-up to your thing was, what advice would I give somebody? The only advice is really understand your why, WHY.
Exactly. Yeah. Not the YMCA. Got it.
Yeah. You need to get grounded in why you're doing what you're doing. And for me, it's all about, at least in the YMCA world, it's about, we make the commitment that we say we're for all. And that quote, for all, is really what connects this type of work and this type of leadership to the work of the YMCA, which is, to be for all, you can't exclude people. And you need to bring people together. And there's quite a bit of difference, as you know, across our country. There's a lot of, we've forgotten how, and we haven't been utilizing our dialogical muscle to be able to sit with difference. Like, you can really believe something, and I can believe something, and we still should come together. And can come together, and I can appreciate where you're coming from, and you can appreciate where I'm coming from. Where the disconnect comes is, I can sit with you in that difference as long as you're not oppressing or marginalizing people.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
You went back to a word earlier, the word comfortable.
Yeah.
And I decided, for all the listeners out there, Kyle and I didn't really want to script this session. So there were only a few questions that I wanted to cover. And the one was, when did you become comfortable? And I realized when you answered it, that's a term I don't like to use, the word comfortable, because I like to be uncomfortably comfortable. And I can relate it to pretty simple, basic things that I think everybody can. You like to work out. I like to work out. You're a mountain biker. I'm a roadie. And I don't get faster by, just going out and doing the same ride at the same pace or avoiding the biggest hill. If I'm going to get stronger, I'm going to get faster. I do another rep. I climb another hill. I shift down to a harder gear, go a little longer. I think we all know to be uncomfortable makes us stronger. But what you were talking about earlier with the uh, dialogical or dialogue, I can't say that word, but I
I
like
know.
that dialogue muscle. I'll say that the dialogue muscle. And we have lost a lot of that, and we don't engage that in enough. And I'm of the same as you. If I can have very challenging discussions with people, as long as there's some empathy and there's not this internal hatred and kind of violence towards others that I'll hear expressed fairly quickly.
Yeah.
But I really wanted to go back to that point of being uncomfortably comfortable, because I don't think any of us, you and I do have that unearned privilege, and I'm using that term more and more since you introduced me to it. Um, we do, and we recognize it. But I want to say to people out there, and I wanted to get your comments on this. Uh, I was I was the fragile person. I chose the name the Humpty Project first because so many other things were taken already on the internet and copyrighted and on podcasts. But I chose it in part because I love the image of something thin and white and fragile.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have run with others like, oh, the yolk isn't cooked inside and so forth.
No.
I but I really try hard not to make people think that I'm calling them out and saying you're wrong for thinking this way. I like to challenge myself to think differently. And I realized that I was that really fragile white male. And I thought that anybody who said that I had privilege meant that I didn't work hard to get to where I am. Now, I don't
Okay.
remember. I think you went to university, Kyle, but I didn't. I started 17 years old right out of high school, and I carried around as a lab tech in the electronics business. So I've been in this business really my whole life.
Mhm.
And I was really uncomfortable with people saying, anything about white privilege. Like,
Sure.
I worked hard to get here. I studied what I had to. I took on extra things at work, and I can sit with that now and say, yes, I did more than the average person. But I go back to a very, very early time when I was afforded the chance at 26, 35 years ago, to be a regional salesperson. I would become a regional. And then a few years later, I was running customer service as well for this very small company. And I interviewed several people. One was a younger black gentleman, and the owner of the company saw him leave the interview and said, "Don't hire the black kid. You can't hire
Ooh.
the black kid because you can't fire black people." And I've recounted this story to others, and other
Ooh.
people have said, "Oh yeah, I've heard that said too." And I realized it was then that the light started to go off a bit, and that, yeah, I would never have gotten the job that I had that gave me the break in this industry had I been a person of color. And
Sure.
in this company, a woman or probably any number of other ethnicities, um, certainly people with any number of disabilities would have been excluded by this gentleman as well. So that's where I started to realize and become somewhat willing to really explore that side of privilege and say, okay, I did well, and I've accomplished things, but I've done it maybe by, if I look at a 400-meter race, let's say, I was starting out at the 50-meter mark, where others were starting out maybe 500 meters, having to
Behind
run.
you.
Yeah, exactly. But I realized that I am afforded privilege, and I saw this. So I'm doing a lot of the talking. I'm supposed to be hosting, but
Go
uh,
ahead.
yeah, Paul, not sure how to pronounce his last name, Paul L, I'll say, showed this wheel of privilege. And I realized that I'm pretty much in the dead center. If you took away the educational piece, I'm in the dead center of the wheel of privilege. I'm white, I'm male, I'm cisgender. I wasn't really wealthy as a kid, didn't come from a wealthy family. Wealthier now, I'm certainly in the top percents, I'm sure. Um, and I look at all that and say, I'm kind of in the dead center. I'm the bullseye of somebody that has
Sure.
privilege. I mean, my physique, I've always been lean. So these are all characteristics that really give you a leg up. And now I'm comfortable talking about it. And I'm almost uncomfortable not talking about it, Kyle, because I feel like I I feel almost compelled to do what I'm doing now. And I know it comes with some risk, but like you said earlier, the biggest risk is pretty minor when you look at what people have had to suffer and continue to endure, whether that's people of color, women, people with disabilities, uh, neurodivergence, which I'm learning more about that term. So
Sure.
anything that you'd like to expound on as I kind of brain dumped there?
No, I mean, you bring up a lot of great points around, privilege, fragility, calling in, calling out. How do you sit with discomfort? The whole idea of right to comfort. I mean, all of those are topics that you could have another hour long show.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, no
it's
doubt.
funny. I have a lot to say about any one of those topics. Again, from the perspective of living with the experience of trying to change the status quo from a leadership perspective. And I think you were talking about Paul Ladipo. Yeah.
I was.
So he's great. So
Yeah.
those of you that are listening, check him out on LinkedIn. And this weekend, he was on someone's show talking about Midwest nice.
I've lived in the Midwest, so I can relate.
Yeah, and there's also a Pacific Northwest nice as well. So
Okay.
he was talking about how being nice has nothing to do with racism, which is absolutely true.
Right.
And his point was, one of the points that he made is like, you can come help shovel me out of my driveway, but then you can go to the voter ballot and you can cast votes. That's definitely going to impede me as a black man. He is a black man that can, kind of curtail my rights as a person living here. You can go vote that right now. So anyway, ton of different things to talk about there. I'll just tell you this one brief story. In the last couple of
Please.
days, I tried to call somebody in at an institution that I'm connected with. And long story short, um, did I call him in or call him out? Well, I mean, I think that's for debate,
Right.
but I'm also using my voice again, and again, the idea of this quote unquote, the perfect way to give somebody feedback. Perfection is a white supremacy cultural norm as well, and there's anecdotes about that. And then the other thing about white supremacy culture is when you do give feedback and you bump up against it, a strategy to defend the status quo is actually to, no matter how skilled or unskilled the feedback was delivered, we're going to focus on the feedback and the way you delivered it as opposed to the inherent racism in the thing that was being addressed. So we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the way that you told me that. And this is
Got it.
two white, and this happens to be two white people talking to each other.
Right.
Imagine
Right.
if a black or brown person had the courage to say something to a white person that has privilege, has power, and they deliver whatever the feedback is in a way that white person didn't appreciate. Conversation's over. We're not talking about that ever again. And I'll tell you another story is, very similar, is that I went to this Undoing Institutional Racism conference when I got this one job. And I came back from this 3-day, life-changing experience from my perspective. And I go to my board chair at the time and I said, hey, I gave him all the stuff and I can't wait to do this. We're going to change our institution. And he said, there's no racism. Racism isn't a thing. Not only that, but there's no racism here. And I won't divulge where here was just to protect people. But the idea that the belief was that there was no racism and that it doesn't happen in the particular town that we were in. Fortunately, his term was very short.
I'll have to think about an episode where we dive into maybe some casual conversation around what is racism, because I think people see it as some of the most egregious things, violence against people, or actual denial of service or something like that. I'm not quite sure, but I think there's probably a resource center that the Humpty Project needs to put together for those that are curious and want to go on this journey with us. Uh, One of
Yeah,
the things that,
absolutely. Yeah, I think, and that whole concept, one of the things that we did at our institution, which is sort of a best practice within that whole thing. I mean, normalizing conversations about race for me is a strategy. So people are, generally speaking, people are not comfortable in the, like, I don't even want to talk about race sort of context. So one strategy for us is normalizing conversations about race. And within that idea, you have to kind of prepare the environment as best you can to reduce harm. You're not trying to make everyone comfortable, you're trying to reduce harm. And so within all of that, there's these ways that you can help build an environment that then makes it easier to talk about race. Again, I go back to the flexing of the muscle thing and back to your idea of the analogy of exercise and the stress on the system. The only way that you build muscle or endurance is by stressing it. So you have to be at that threshold a little bit of time to make the muscle tear down to then build upon itself to get stronger. And so that is a linear progression. So every day, if you added, a minute to your time, or you added, 2 pounds to the lift that you were doing, over time, that would build up and build up and build up, and you'd just be getting more and more strength. What I've found in this leadership journey that I'm on, and specifically with anti-racism work, it's more of it's not a linear progression. It's more like if somebody had taken, like a cat had taken a bunch of yarn and started playing with it all day, and then it's all over the place. So sometimes you're going to make some progress, and then sometimes you're going to be bounced to the side. You may not go backwards, but you get bounced around and you kind of come at this. One of the things that I found that is helpful, though, is going back to raising of the bar, of the belonging achievement relationship. So what we're
okay,
trying to maintain in that whole dialogue, it's about staying in community, because we're going to grow together. It's going to take all of us to create because remember, we're talking about systems. So when something changes, we're going to change the system, and it's not going to help if one or two people are the only two people there creating the new system. It's got to be everybody helping replace what you're changing, and that has to work for everybody.
isn't that the whole concept of equity and inclusion, right?
Yeah, right.
Not just having a diverse organization, but allowing them people to use their voice and actually listening to and hearing those voices and placing
Yeah,
value behind them.
yeah, and you wouldn't believe, just over the last like 6 7 days, some of the messages that I've received, some on LinkedIn, but more in my job, about people wanting, how hard the system is trying to maintain itself. And you see things in Tennessee and Florida and Texas that are happening that I don't even know what the word would be. Disturbing isn't even the right word. I don't have language to put to what's going on there politically, and what they're trying to accomplish is beyond me.
Yeah,
And again,
go ahead.
back to radical F in leadership is, we need to stand up. I mean, we white people specifically, and white males in positions of power, we need to be the ones that are standing up and standing with people of color. It's not one where the others fight to change it. It's our battle to wage and help together.
Kyle, it's been an outstanding conversation, and I can see us having more and more of these types of conversations in the future. One of the things I want to wrap up with is it could be idealistic, but can you imagine ways that industry could partner with YMCAs throughout the country, throughout the nation, to develop and train people that have not had the exposure to the world of electronics, components manufacturing and distribution like I have? Can you imagine any possibility of a world like that? Because I see the Y as connecting at a community level, and I see so many of our jobs are becoming either partly work from home hybrid or even full on remote. So I'm curious, has the Y ever explored possibilities of partnering with industry and developing training programs and doing something really impactful rather than just I'm not saying the Y is not doing anything impactful, but from my point of view, I want to be impactful and do more than just talk about and raise awareness.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And yes, I think any Y could do that. And when you go back to RFL, radical effing leadership, what we're talking about there is, creating cultures. Again, we're back to the cultural aspect of
Right.
this, and you can't have one without the other. So you could have what you've determined a successful company today, but if your culture was even better and you didn't have this, talent pipeline issue that you're talking about, and you had
Right.
more diverse people, your goals you'd be blowing whatever it is that you're doing now out of the water.
I've seen
So
lots of
yes,
stats to that effect.
what's that?
I've seen a lot of stats to that effect.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, my team, we are not, again, we're not perfect. We have diversified our staff. We're still on the journey. Um, and you go back to all that racism that was in the Wall Street Journal article about how the SBV, Silicon Valley Bank, SBB Bank, might have gone under because they were distracted with DE&I efforts. I mean, that is just a bunch of bullshit and racist bullshit, to be super blunt. And so at our last board meeting, we were celebrating our first 3 months of the year in 2023, where we have dove head deep into the deep end of an anti-racism culture. And again, we're just scratching the surface over the last, say, 6 years or so in making changes. And I can tell you 1,000% that our finances have never been stronger.
Great to hear.
So to say that somehow we were distracted, or that a bank of that stature was distracted by DE&I efforts, is just bullshit. But
Yeah,
that's
I hadn't heard that.
that's the culture. So that's the environment that is the media culture is not helping the whole conversation.
Oh yeah.
Right? It's not doing its part. It's not using its voice in a way that is bringing us together.
Well,
What
it
it's
wants to
doing
protect itself, doesn't it?
right. It's trying to protect itself. It's trying to maintain the status quo, because how do they get money? They get money through advertising, people buying the paper. They're not centering people in the broader conversation. So back to your comment about the YMCA and radical effing leadership, I would partner with anybody that wants to start taking on, leadership at a different level within their organization to create cultures that center people around belonging, achievement, relationships. It'll diversify, and there's some scaffolding too. I'm sure that your company is, well intended, and even when you're well intended, you're going to create harm because you're so early on in the diversification and anti-racism journey. So, and I made reference to earlier in our conversation that when we went through this change process, I caused harm to Black and brown people that were in our boardroom because the white people in the boardroom were not ready to have the race and racism conversation. And I even had a consulting firm that happened to be Black and brown led. I mean, we were doing a lot of the, if you say correct things or right things, whatever the things were, but there's still harm is caused if you don't do some of that scaffolding. And some of that I talked about, which is, you need to understand your why. Why does your why want to diversify? Why do they want to be a voice within this whole change process. So understanding the why, committing to the work, understanding that you're going to have to unlearn some stuff that you especially if you're an older white man, you're going to hear some stuff that you're not going to believe. You're going to think that it's made up. And that was true for me too. And so one of the things that I keep saying, and I keep saying it, is you have to believe lived experience is as important as any other experience that's coming to the table. You have to, believe with some empathy there. And knowing that a Black single mother's experience in the United States is very different than my experience in the United States. And then you also have to believe that racism was constructed intentionally, so therefore it can be undone if we want to be. If we want it to be undone, we can undo it. I mean, corporate America during the pandemic, within a few hours of understanding that the world was going to be shut down for some period of time, I mean, absolutely pivoted within hours.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how nimble like the whole economy was. So if that can happen, we know that we can do this. It's just we need to get people to commit to it. And people are afraid of losing power and all the things that come with change. I mean, there's a funny joke about change is great. You go first.
Pink Floyd says, share it fairly, but don't take a slice of my pie.
Exactly.
Well, and that leads me to a final thought, and what I feel like I see and hear is a lot of people arguing about or being concerned about privilege and hearing this term white privilege or privilege and getting themselves rather worked up over the topic, but fighting really hard to defend a privilege that they deny exists.
Mm-hmm.
That I find to be really ironic if you look at it
totally
that way. There's no such thing as white privilege, but yet what you see being enacted throughout various legislatures, town councils now, even where I live, they had a big thing about, not teaching CRT, and it's not even taught. And
right. It's crazy. School.
And yet,
you do not want to be at a school board meeting these days.
Yeah, that goes back to our early conversation of just the inability to have proper dialogue anymore.
Right.
So
we've lost the ability to have civil discourse.
So my whole goal with this concept of this Humpty Project and the podcast and bringing people like you on is to expose different voices than we would normally hear within my audience, my network of a couple thousand people on LinkedIn, to challenge people and embrace that concept of being uncomfortably comfortable. I want people to be able to feel like I can and I should use my voice in the meeting. When someone said something that's even just a bit untoward, even sometimes fairly minor things, it lands differently on a Black woman's ear, a gay person's ear, a woman's ears. It lands differently. And when we in the moment can be allies, it changes the whole tenor. And others listen to you and me differently than they would women in a meeting. So or in a in any context, social context, chats online. I know that this can get pretty rough in terms of the conversation. I know there's a lot of people who get a tremendous thrill out of trolling, but I feel as if it's time, and I really appreciate that you took the time to be my first guest. Can people get in touch with you if you're interested?
I'm assuming. Well, how will this be shared? Is this shared through LinkedIn?
Yes, I'll be posting this on LinkedIn. You'll also find it on all the podcasting services, such as Buzzsprout, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. I'll be uploading it to Facebook under the Humpty Project group, and I'm working to create a similar group on LinkedIn. So, Kyle, I want to thank you for your time and for the introduction of radical effing leadership to my audience. I look forward to another podcast session with you sometime soon.